Crystal was last seen on the 4th of July, a day of fireworks, a day of family gatherings, a day when nobody notices when a woman disappears. Her car was found abandoned on the side of a Kentucky highway, with the keys still in the ignition, her purse on the seat, and her phone left inside. The driver's door was open. There was no sign of a struggle, no sign that she had run. And the man she lived with, the father of her 2-year-old son, did not look for her, did not call her family, and did not help at all, because Brooks Houck knew exactly where Crystal was, and Brooks' brother was a cop. Welcome to Close Circle Crime Stories, the channel where we go deep into cases involving people who knew each other. Because most crimes are not committed by a stranger in the dark. They are committed by someone at the dinner table, someone in the family group chat, someone inside the closest circle. And today's case is exactly that. If this is your first time here, make sure you subscribe before we go any further, because every week we dig into cases like this, and you do not want to miss the next one. Today, we are talking about Crystal Rogers, Bardstown, Kentucky, July of 2015. A mother of 5, a town that called itself one of the most beautiful small towns in America, and a powerful family that, for years, seemed untouchable. To understand why this case still haunts so many people, you have to start with Crystal herself. Crystal Marie Ballard was born on April 4, 1980, in Bardstown, Kentucky. Bardstown was one of those places that looked almost too peaceful to hide something dark. It had charm, old brick buildings, a close-knit community, and the kind of reputation that made outsiders think nothing terrible could happen there. It was the kind of town where people waved from their porches, where neighbors knew each other's routines, and where everyone seemed connected in one way or another. Crystal grew up there with her parents, Tommy and Sherry Ballard, and with her siblings Casey and Brooke. By every account, they were a tight family. Crystal had an especially close relationship with her father, Tommy. People who knew them said the bond between them was obvious. He adored her, and she adored him right back. As a child, Crystal was known for being a little shy at first, but once people got to know her, they remembered her for how genuine she was. She was warm, generous, and the kind of person who made herself available when someone needed help. Friends described her as fun to be around, easy to love, and deeply loyal. She was not the loudest person in the room, but she was often the one people trusted most. She married young to a man named Keith Rogers, and together they had 4 children, 3 daughters and a son. When that marriage ended in 2012, it did not turn into the kind of bitter split that destroys a family. They remained respectful. They shared custody. Crystal even kept the last name Rogers because she wanted consistency for the kids. That detail tells you a lot about who she was. She thought about stability. She thought about what would make things easier for her children. She carried that kind of responsibility naturally. After the marriage ended, Crystal moved into a rental property, and that is where she met Brooks Houck, the landlord. At first, the relationship did not set off alarm bells. The family accepted him. From the outside, things looked fine. Then Crystal got pregnant, and in 2013 she gave birth to a little boy named Eli. Her family celebrated. Now Crystal was the mother of 5 children, and people close to her said she handled it all with a kind of quiet strength that made hard things look easier than they were. But beneath the surface, the relationship with Brooks was becoming something very different from what it appeared to be. Crystal's family started noticing that Brooks treated her older 4 children differently from Eli, his biological son. He did not step up for them. He did not contribute the way people felt he should have. Crystal was still carrying most of the burden herself, and that mattered because Brooks was not struggling financially. He had multiple properties, he had money, he had resources, but the support Crystal needed was not really there. Over time, there were also concerns that he was controlling, that he wanted to influence who Crystal saw and who she spoke to, that he wanted her more isolated than connected. The family began to feel that Brooks was not simply difficult. He was dangerous in a quieter way, in the kind of way that often becomes obvious only after damage has already been done. Crystal reportedly tried to leave him more than once, but leaving was not simple. Brooks was not just another boyfriend. He came from a family with influence in Bardstown, and one detail mattered more than almost anything else. Brooks' brother, Nick Houck, was a police officer. That changed the balance of power. Crystal understood what a custody fight could look like if she went up against a man with money, family connections, and a cop in the family. And so she stayed longer than she should have had to stay. Then July 3rd, 2015 arrived. That day, Crystal was at home with Brooks and their little boy, Eli. Her older 4 children were away with friends, which was not unusual for a holiday weekend. At around 4:30 in the afternoon, surveillance cameras captured Crystal leaving a Walmart in Bardstown with shopping bags in her hands. A neighbor later said they saw her arrive home with groceries and go inside. After that, she was gone. The next day, July 4th, Crystal's oldest daughter Kylie tried calling her mother. There was no answer. She sent messages, still nothing. That was immediately unusual because Crystal answered for her kids. People close to her were clear about that. She did not just disappear from her children's lives for a day. That was not normal behavior for her. Kylie then called her grandmother, Sherry Ballard, asking if she had heard from Crystal. Sherry sent Crystal a message and asked her to call Kylie back. At that point, it still felt possible that there was some simple explanation. Maybe she was busy. Maybe her phone was off. Maybe she had stepped away. But as the hours passed, that explanation started feeling less and less believable. Later, Kylie checked again. Still nothing. And that is when concern turned into fear. Friends and family began trying to contact Crystal in every possible way over the next 2 days. Calls, texts, messages through other people. No response. Meanwhile, Brooks Houck did not act like a man in crisis. He did not launch a desperate search. He did not immediately call her family in a panic. He did not seem frantic to find the mother of his child. In fact, according to reports, he did not even try contacting Crystal until the morning of July 4th, more than 12 hours after he later claimed to have last seen her. He sent one message saying everybody was worried, and later another asking her to call him. But even that felt strangely delayed and strangely performative. On July 5th, Crystal's family headed to the Nelson County Sheriff's Office to report her missing. And on the way there, they saw Brooks driving. Sherry Ballard stopped and asked him directly if they had fought, if he knew where Crystal was, if there was something he was not saying. Brooks said no. Sherry told him they were going to file a missing person report. His answer was chilling in its flatness. He told her, "I guess that's what you need to do." That was it. No urgency, no panic, no offer to go with them, no visible desperation. Around the same time, Crystal's ex-husband Keith Rogers spotted her car abandoned on the side of the Bluegrass Parkway. Crystal's father Tommy and her brother Casey rushed to the scene. What they found immediately raised serious questions. The vehicle was sitting on the shoulder with a flat tire. The keys were still in the ignition. Crystal's phone was still inside. So was her purse, with her personal belongings and identification. And perhaps, most telling of all, the driver's seat had been pushed so far back that Crystal, who was much shorter, would not have been able to drive comfortably that way. That detail mattered. It suggested someone else had been behind the wheel. Police responded, and once the car was found, the case shifted fast. Search teams were brought in. Dogs were used. Volunteers from the community showed up in large numbers. Bardstown plastered Crystal's face on flyers and signs. The whole town knew she was missing. But one person remained strangely absent from all of it. Brooks Houck did not meaningfully participate in the searches. He did not make emotional public pleas. He did not behave the way people expected a worried partner to behave. Crystal's family noticed it immediately, and so did investigators. Detective John Snow became one of the key investigators in the case, and when he first spoke with Brooks on July 5th, he quickly saw the disconnect between the situation and Brooks' demeanor. Brooks claimed he thought Crystal may have gone to a cousin's house. That cousin was contacted. Crystal had never gone there. Brooks was interviewed again on July 7th and July 8th, and during those interviews, he laid out what sounded like a carefully constructed timeline for July 3rd. He said he had gone to pay a bill related to his construction work, then returned home. He said Crystal came back from Walmart with groceries. He said that later that evening, he, Crystal, and little Eli went together to the Houck family farm to feed cattle. According to Brooks, they stayed there late into the night, left just before midnight, returned home, and then he went to bed, while Crystal stayed up using her phone. When he woke the next morning, he claimed She and her car were both gone. It was a neat story, maybe too neat, because as investigators looked closer, cracks appeared. During that supposed late-night drive back from the farm, Brooks had received a brief phone call. When asked who called, he claimed he could not remember. Detective Snow had him call the number back. The man who answered was Steve Lawson, one of Brooks' employees. That conversation raised immediate suspicion. Brooks acted as though he had forgotten why Lawson had called, and Lawson responded as though they had been discussing one of Brooks' rental properties and that Crystal was the one who handled that kind of work. But if Crystal had allegedly been sitting right there with Brooks during that drive, why would he need to call someone else to ask about something Crystal supposedly managed? The explanation did not fit. Then something even more revealing happened. In the middle of Brooks' interview, his phone rang. It was his brother, Nick Hook, the police officer. Brooks answered in front of detectives, and during that call, Nick told him to stop talking and leave. The implication was unmistakable. A police officer was advising his brother, the main person of interest in a missing woman's case, to shut down cooperation and walk out. And that is exactly what Brooks did. He ended the interview and left. That moment changed how many people saw the case. Because now, this was not just about a missing woman and a suspicious boyfriend. This was about possible interference from law enforcement itself. Nick Hook became a major focus, but when police finally got him into an interview, he appeared to know how to say as little as possible while pretending to say something. He claimed he barely knew Crystal. He said he only saw her a handful of times over the years. He could not remember key details. When investigators asked questions that might connect him to suspicious circumstances, his memory seemed to disappear. Investigators eventually pushed further and had Nick take a polygraph. The results, according to law enforcement, suggested deception when he was asked whether he knew where Crystal was or whether he was withholding information about what happened to her. Nick denied everything, but the damage was done. By September of 2015, he was suspended from the Bardstown Police Department. In October, he was fired for interfering in the investigation. And around that same time, police publicly announced what Crystal's family had already come to believe. Brooks Hook was the prime suspect in Crystal Rogers' disappearance and presumed murder. Still, years passed without an arrest. And while the official investigation moved slowly, one man refused to let the case die. Tommy Ballard. Crystal's father became the engine behind the search for answers. He organized community efforts, worked his own leads, hired private investigators, paid for search resources himself, and turned his life into a mission to find his daughter. He documented everything, every suspicious detail, every conversation, every address, every theory. People who later saw the amount of information Tommy had gathered said it was unlike anything they had ever seen from a family member in a case like this. Tommy was not waiting for justice to happen by itself. He was chasing it. And the closer he got, the more uneasy things seemed to become. Tommy reportedly told people he felt he was being watched. He installed cameras. He carried a gun. He added a dash cam to his car. He did not treat his fear as paranoia. He treated it as a warning. Then, on November 19, 2016, about 16 months after Crystal vanished, Tommy took his 12-year-old grandson Trenton on a hunting trip. It was supposed to be a tradition, a normal family moment in the middle of unimaginable pain. At some point, Trenton stepped away briefly to get something from the vehicle. Then he heard a gunshot. When he ran back, Tommy was on the ground. He had been shot in the chest. He called out for help, but there was nothing his grandson could do to save him. Tommy Ballard died there. For Crystal's family, the meaning of that killing was immediate and devastating. They believed Tommy had been murdered because he was getting too close to the truth about what happened to Crystal. Now the family was not just living with one unresolved loss, they were living with two, and still there were no arrests. In 2017, Kentucky State Police took over the case. In 2020, the FBI became heavily involved. That mattered because the case needed distance from Bardstown and from the local influence that had hovered over it from the beginning. The FBI began executing search warrants across properties connected to the Hook family. Investigators took another look at locations tied to Brooks and began uncovering pieces that, while not giving them everything, began to form a more coherent picture. One employee, Charlie Girdley, reportedly said he helped Brooks pour concrete in a barn on the Houck family farm. That detail quickly caught attention because of the timing and because investigators believed the farm played a central role in what happened to Crystal. Searches also uncovered women's underwear buried under concrete at another location, along with hairs. Although the evidence did not conclusively identify Crystal, it deepened suspicion and reinforced the idea that efforts had been made to conceal physical evidence. Then digital evidence started doing what witnesses and rumor could not. Google location data reportedly showed that Brooks spent large parts of July 3rd at the Houck family farm, not out handling routine business in the way he had suggested. That location data undercut his version of the day, and Crystal's phone activity painted another disturbing picture. Forensic analysis suggested the phone was active for a period that evening, then turned off, later turned back on, and then manually powered down again. Prosecutors would later argue that Crystal was already dead by that point and that someone else was manipulating her phone. Years passed, but the case was still moving underneath the surface. Then, in 2023, the first major arrests finally came. Joseph Lawson was arrested and charged with conspiracy to commit murder and tampering with physical evidence. He was the son of Steve Lawson, the same man connected to that suspicious late-night phone call years earlier. Investigators believe Joseph had been involved in moving Crystal's car to the Bluegrass Parkway after her disappearance, staging the scene, and then calling for help once that part of the job was done. Soon after that, Brooks Houck was arrested and charged with murder and tampering with physical evidence. The bond set against him was massive, reflecting both the seriousness of the case and his wealth. Then Steve Lawson was also arrested. At last, it seemed like the wall that had protected this case for so long was starting to crack. But prosecutors also revealed something else that widened the shadow hanging over the Houck family even more. They stated that a firearm believed to be connected to Tommy Ballard's murder had been sold by Nick Houck under a false name. That did not immediately result in charges against Nick or against Brooks and Nick's mother, Rosemary Houck, but both were described as unindicted co-conspirators. That meant investigators believed there was evidence pointing toward involvement, even if they were not yet formally charged. For Crystal's family, that was not closure. But it was confirmation that the circle around this case was larger than one man. Then came the trial. In June 2025, nearly 10 years after Crystal disappeared, Brooks Houck and Joseph Lawson went on trial in Bowling Green, Kentucky. The case had been moved away from Bardstown because it had become impossible to find a truly neutral jury pool there. Too many people had followed the case. Too many people had opinions. From the start, the prosecution acknowledged the difficulty of what they were asking the jury to do. This was a circumstantial case. Crystal's body had never been found. There was no classic crime scene. There was no recovered body to place in front of the jury and say, this is where it happened, this is how it happened, this is where we found her. Instead, prosecutors built a chain. They argued that Brooks had a motive. He did not want child support obligations. He did not want a custody battle. He wanted Crystal out of the way. They introduced testimony suggesting that shortly before Crystal vanished, Brooks had already begun replacing the work she did for him, as though he knew she would no longer be around. They presented evidence that Crystal had been promised a surprise date the night she disappeared, a date that allegedly brought her to the Houck family farm. They showed the inconsistencies in Brooks's account of his movements, the suspicious phone records, the conduct of the Lawsons, and the strange behavior from Nick Houck. One of the most striking details to emerge at trial was that Brooks had secretly recorded one of his own police interviews. According to testimony, he walked into that interview with a recorder running in his pocket, apparently wanting a record of exactly what he said so that his story would remain consistent. Investigators said they had almost never seen behavior like that from an innocent person in a missing person case. Witnesses connected the dots piece by piece. Charlie Girdley testified that Steve Lawson had said Brooks wanted to get rid of his woman. Testimony also linked Joseph Lawson to the car being abandoned on the Bluegrass Parkway and to calls for help after that vehicle placement. The defense tried to argue that without a body, there could be no certainty. They attacked credibility. They challenged the state's interpretation of events. They tried to say the case was built on assumptions layered over suspicion. But after hearing the evidence, the jury deliberated for only a short time before reaching a verdict. Brooks Huck was found guilty of Crystal Rogers' murder. Joseph Lawson was found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder. For Crystal's family, that moment was overwhelming. It was not complete justice. It was not the same as bringing Crystal home. But it was the first time in a decade that the legal system had clearly said what they had known in their hearts all along. In September 2025, Brooks Huck was sentenced to life in prison. Joseph Lawson received 25 years. Steve Lawson, who was tried separately, was later sentenced as well. At sentencing, Crystal's mother, Sherry, addressed Brooks directly. Her words carried the weight of 10 years of grief, rage, and endurance. She said that in all that time, she had never seen him truly care, never seen him cry for Crystal, never heard him ask where she was. She made it clear that she would fight him for the rest of his life if that is what it took, showing up at every parole hearing, refusing to let the system forget what he had done. And even after all of that, one terrible truth remains. Crystal Rogers has still never been found. Her family still cannot bury her. They still do not know where she is. They still do not have that final act of mercy that so many grieving families cling to. And Tommy Ballard's murder remains unresolved in the formal sense. No one has yet been fully brought to justice for the killing of the father who refused to stop searching for his daughter. That is what makes this case so haunting. It is not just a story about murder. It is a story about power, silence, fear, family loyalty turned toxic, and the devastating cost of living in a place where influence can delay justice for years. It is also a story about the opposite of silence, about a family that would not stop speaking Crystal's name, about a father who gave everything he had to find his daughter, about a mother who kept going after losing both her child and her husband, about children who grew up in the shadow of answers they were denied. And maybe that is the question that lingers most after everything else. How many people knew? How many people helped? How many people stood by and said nothing because the Huck name carried weight in Bardstown? And maybe one day there will be more arrests. Maybe one day there will be more charges. Maybe one day Crystal will finally be brought home. But until that happens, this case remains unfinished. Because justice without her remains is not full justice. If you are still here, subscribe to Close Circle Crime Stories, because these are exactly the cases we are here to tell. The ones hidden inside families, inside small towns, inside circles of trust where betrayal cuts deepest. And tell me in the comments what you think. Do you believe Nick Huck and Rosemary Huck will ever be indicted? And do you believe Crystal can still be found after all this time? This was Close Circle Crime Stories. Take care.